On the corner of Maple and 3rd Street stood a small vintage shop that most people walked past without a second glance. On sunny days, timeless treasures looked ordinary enough. Dusty windows displaying old furniture, vintage clothing, and antique knickknacks that seemed to have been arranged haphazardly by someone who cared more about storage than presentation. But when rain began to fall, something extraordinary happened to both the shop and everyone inside it. The shop's owner, Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, was a woman whose age seemed to shift depending on the weather. On clear days, she appeared to be a typical elderly shopkeeper with silver hair and gentle lines around her eyes. But when raindrops started tapping against the windows, years seemed to fall away from her face, and she moved with the graceful energy of someone decades younger. She had discovered the shop's unusual properties quite by accident 30 years earlier, but had spent every rainy day since then learning to harness its mysterious power. The magic always began with the first drops of rain touching the shop's roof. Customers browsing inside would notice that the antique clocks scattered throughout the store, grandfather clocks, mantel clocks, pocket watches, and cuckoo clocks, would all begin to slow down simultaneously. Their ticking would become deeper, more resonant, until it synced with the rhythm of raindrops on the windows. Time itself seemed to thicken like honey, allowing moments to stretch into hours of perfect peace and reflection. Regular customers learned to watch the weather forecast and planned their visits accordingly. Sarah, a stressed marketing executive, would drop by whenever storms were predicted, knowing that she could spend what felt like an entire afternoon browsing through vintage books and antique jewelry, only to discover when she left that mere minutes had passed in the outside world. The rain-slowed time gave her something she could never find elsewhere: unhurried moments to think, breathe, and remember who she was beneath all her professional responsibilities. The shop's inventory seemed to respond to the temporal changes as well. Objects that looked worn and faded on sunny days would begin to glow with subtle warmth when time slowed. A tarnished silver music box would suddenly reveal intricate engravings that hadn't been visible before. Vintage photographs would become so vivid that customers could almost hear the voices of the people captured in them. Old books would release the scent of the years they had absorbed, carrying stories not just in their pages, but in their very essence. Miss Hartwell had learned that different types of rain created different temporal effects. Light drizzles would slow time gently, creating a dreamy atmosphere perfect for quiet contemplation. Steady rainfall would create more substantial time dilation, allowing for deep conversations and meaningful connections between strangers. Thunderstorms produced the most dramatic effects, sometimes stretching a single hour into what felt like an entire peaceful day. The shop attracted people who desperately needed what it offered: time to think, space to breathe, moments to connect with themselves and others without the pressure of schedules and deadlines. A young father overwhelmed by new parenthood would discover that he could spend hours in the shop learning to appreciate vintage baby toys and children's books, gaining perspective on his own parenting challenges while feeling completely rested despite having a sleepless infant at home. On rainy days, the shop became an unofficial community center where the usual social barriers dissolved, along with normal time constraints. Business executives found themselves sharing childhood memories with college students over vintage postcards. Elderly customers would teach younger visitors forgotten skills like proper tea brewing or letter writing using the shop's collection of antique writing implements. The slowed time created space for the kinds of meaningful human connections that were increasingly rare in the rushed modern world. Mrs. Hartwell discovered that the shop's time distortion had healing properties beyond simple relaxation. People dealing with grief found that the extended moments allowed them to process their emotions without feeling rushed or judged. The shop provided a sanctuary where tears could be shed slowly, memories could be savored without time pressure, and healing could happen at its own natural pace, rather than according to arbitrary timelines imposed by work schedules or social expectations. The vintage items themselves seemed to serve as conduits for the shop's temporal magic. A customer trying on a vintage dress from the 1940s might find themselves experiencing flashes of the dress's history, the dance where it was first worn, the woman who had cherished it, the joy and sorrow it had witnessed. These glimpses into the past weren't overwhelming or frightening, but rather comforting reminders of the continuity of human experience across generations. Children were particularly sensitive to the shop's effect. On rainy afternoons, when parents needed shelter from storms, young visitors would discover vintage toys that seemed to come alive in their hands. Wooden trains would run smoother, music boxes would play clearer melodies, and old storybooks would reveal illustrations that seemed to move and breathe. Children would become completely absorbed in play, their natural sense of timelessness amplifying the shop's magical properties. The shop's most remarkable feature was its memory corner, a section filled with vintage photographs, letters, and personal memorabilia that previous customers had donated. During rain-slowed time, these objects would begin to tell their stories to anyone who held them with genuine curiosity. A faded wedding photo might convey the emotion of that long-ago celebration, while an old love letter could transmit the hope and excitement of its original writer. Mrs. Hartwell learned to guide customers toward the items that would most benefit them during their rain-extended visit. Someone struggling with a major life decision might find themselves drawn to vintage compasses and maps, spending contemplative hours considering direction and journey. A person dealing with relationship challenges might gravitate toward collections of vintage love letters, gaining perspective on the universal nature of human connection and conflict. The shop also served as an unintentional therapy center, as the combination of slowed time and nostalgic objects created the perfect environment for emotional processing and personal insight. Regular customers often reported breakthrough moments that occurred during rainy visits, sudden clarity about career changes, resolution of family conflicts, or simply a renewed sense of gratitude for their current lives. Artists and writers found the rain-slowed shop particularly inspiring. The extended time allowed for deep creative contemplation, while the vintage objects provided endless source material for stories, paintings, and musical composition. Several local artists began timing their creative blocks to coincide with rainy weather, knowing they could spend subjective hours in the shop working through artistic challenges. The temporal effects weren't limited to the shop's interior. Customers who spent extended subjective time inside during rain would often find that their perception of time remained slightly altered even after leaving. They became more present in their daily lives, less rushed in their interactions with others, and more appreciative of small moments that they might previously have overlooked. Mrs. Hartwell discovered that the shop's power seemed to be connected to the building's history. Research revealed that the structure had originally been a clockmaker's workshop in the early 1900s, operated by a craftsman who had dedicated his life to creating timepieces that brought peace rather than stress to their owners. His workshop had burned down during a terrible thunderstorm, but apparently his intention to slow down time for people who needed it had somehow imprinted itself on the location. The shop attracted customers from increasing distances. As word spread about its unique property, business travelers would plan layovers to coincide with rainy weather in the city. Couples would schedule anniversary visits during predicted storms, knowing they could spend what felt like an entire romantic weekend together in the space of a single afternoon. Families would make rainy day pilgrimages, giving their children the gift of unhurried time together. The most beautiful aspect of the shop's magic was that it taught customers to find their own ways of slowing down time in their regular life. People who experienced the rain extended hours began to notice that they could create similar feelings of temporal expansion by paying full attention to simple activities, brewing tea slowly, reading without distraction, or having genuine conversations without checking their phones. Miss Hartwell's greatest joy came from watching customers rediscover their own capacity for presence and patience. The shop served as a reminder that time was not just a resource to be managed, but an experience to be savored, that rushing through life meant missing most of what made life worth living, and that sometimes the most important thing you could do was simply stand still and let the rain slow everything down to the pace of wonder and appreciation. As years passed, The vintage shop became a beloved community institution, a place where people could reliably find refuge, not just from storms, but from the relentless rush of modern life. On every rainy day, time would slow to a gentle crawl within its walls, allowing anyone who entered to experience the luxury of unhurried moments, and the healing power of simply having enough time to be fully present with themselves, with others, and with the beautiful timeless treasures that surrounded them.